Welcome to 56-Bit Cloud Cafe, your go-to destination for all tech topics in the cloud. I'm Atir Zalat.
And I'm Patrick Camilleri. And together we'll be addressing various cloud topics.
Hello everyone and welcome back. In this third episode of our SNS series, we will dive into the security features of SNS and how to control access to topics and manage permissions. So let's start. Security is a big concern with such technologies and when handling any type of data. What security measures does SNS offer to protect sensitive data and to prevent unauthorized access?
Right, so welcome back everyone. To answer your question, Atir, SNS offers a number of security measures. They are inbuilt inside the service, and these would be things like encryption, for example, and messages in SNS are encrypted at rest using standard encryption algorithms like AES 256, for example. And you can also encrypt messages in transit, meaning when a publisher publishes a message or when a subscriber receives that message, depending on how that subscription is done, you can encrypt those messages in transit as well. Like most other AWS services, SNS has great integration with IAM. IAM allows those topics and actions on SNS to be done through an authorized and an authenticated system. So you have to have the right authentication and the right permissions to be able to create topics, delete topics, to be able to publish and subscribe as well if you wish. And all this is done through IAM. Of course, again, like most other services, SNS has good integration with CloudTrail, which is an auditing service that allows security personnel to go through logs to see what actions were done on SNS topics, as well as what messages were published or which messages were successfully published or not successfully published, etc. To keep in mind here that CloudTrail only logs messages that were published and delivered or not to authenticated systems. So it does not support unauthenticated publishing logging.
Okay, that's good to know about the security features. But I'm wondering about more granular control. How can you control access to SNS topics and manage permissions?
So SNS, as we said, it integrates well with IAM, which is the authentication and authorization mechanism of AWS. You can use IAM users and policies attached to those users to define whether that user can publish or subscribe to a topic, whether they can delete a topic, and a number of other things like, for example, what type of subscription is allowed, whether they are allowed only email subscriptions, they can receive messages through email only, or through SMS only, or push notifications, or a mixture of those. So that is done through policies which are attached to IAM users or IAM roles. You also have policies on the topic itself. These resource-based policies basically are attached to the SNS topic itself, which again allows you to do the same things. Who can publish, who can subscribe, what type of subscriptions, etc. But these are attached to the topic itself rather than to the person or application that is publishing or subscribing.
Now, I've heard IAM being mentioned in relation to AWS security along with SNS. Can you explain the role of AWS Identity and Access Management IAM in SNS?
IAM is central to AWS security in general, as well as SNS security. We've already mentioned how to do this using user policies or policies attached to roles or policies attached to the topic itself. And what this allows you is to have both authentication and authorization. Authentication means I am the person who I say I am. I am Patrick, and I'm going to be sending this message to this topic. So it verifies the identity of that user or application sending and receiving from SNS. Authorization defines the permissions of what you are allowed to do. So this person is who he says he is, it's Patrick, and he is allowed to only create topics or only to receive, subscribe to a topic. They cannot publish to this topic. So the permission structure, that is the authorization. And IAM allows both of those, the authentication and the authorization, when it comes to SNS.
That's perfect. Thanks for explaining that. To wrap up our discussion on security, what are some best practices for securing SNS topics and maintaining data privacy?
Best practices when it comes to security, there are the usual patterns here. The first most important one is least privilege. The least privilege means that your policies, whether they are attached to users, to roles, or to the topic itself, should have the minimum permissions required, not more, not less. That's least privilege. And that's probably the best practice you have in SNS. It's also ideal that you use roles whenever you are publishing or subscribing to an SNS topic. When you're doing that from an application inside AWS, you do not need to use a user, but rather use a role, which allows for temporary keys, temporary access to the topic, meaning that if that key is stolen, it will only be available for a few minutes or hours. So a new key will then be generated. And that temporary access is what makes roles really powerful and strong when compared to users. It's also important as a best practice to encrypt any sensitive information that might pass through SNS. SNS itself is encrypted at rest on the hard disks, but it can also be encrypted in transit. Especially if there is sensitive information in there, you should definitely use that encryption feature. And finally, security also involves a lot of logging and a lot of auditing. So enable CloudTrail, make sure that you track the activity that happens inside SNS to detect potential security issues, and there are also automated ways of checking those logs and surfacing any issues that might have occurred, so that you can remain safe and secure.
And by now, we've reached the end of our discussion on SNS security and access control. In our final episode, we will cover monitoring, cost, and best practices for working with SNS. Until then, happy cloud computing!
If you have questions, suggestions, or want to share your feedback, connect with us on social media.
Also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and to leave us a review to help others find their way to the Cloud Cafe.